we hear this report from Jeffrey Gundlach, and we see a number of indicators over the past few days pointing to an early 2024 recession. I guess we always get that sort of Christmas bump, where there's a little bit of temporary hiring. People are sort of, in that Christmas holiday spirit. And then January and February hits, and we could be in for a crap show. What are you seeing right now, and how can you make sense of this?
Well, we look at a couple of things. You brought up the freight. So when you look at freight, one of the indicators you look at with freight, if you can believe this, is cardboard boxes. If you see a dramatic slowdown in cardboard boxes from manufacturers to people who need to deliver it. So I don't know about anyone who's listening to the podcast, but I seem to have an Amazon box show up almost every single day at my house. If you see cardboard boxes starting to decline, usually it's a decent indicator of where the economy is going. Sounds very simple and basic, but a lot of people use it and it's extremely accurate. So I think the freight slowdown is one thing. Uh, Gundelatch is talking about the interest on the debts, going through the roof, not just for the US government, but for consumers as well. So if you look at bankruptcies filed, we are at the same levels of bankruptcies that we were just prior to 2008 from the Great Recession. We are at the same level as in COVID. When you look at personal debt, near record levels, credit card debt, near record levels, actually exceeding record levels, late payments on vehicles climbing to a record level again. These are usually the indicators that say the consumer is tapped out, the free COVID money's at the end, and they're going to slow down their purchases. So what you've seen with a lot of the earnings coming out is that, yes, we may have had a great third quarter. Fourth quarter, we're a little bit concerned because consumer spending is slowing down. They're having to spend more on food. They're having to spend more on interest payments for their mortgages, credit card debt, vehicles, so on and so forth. So I 100% believe that in 2024, we are going to have a recession. I don't know, you must be living under a rock if you don't think we're going to have a recession in 2024. How bad it's going to be is the question.
Yeah, and I guess at the end of the day, right? I mean, even if there's not a recession, what harm does it do to protect your family and to make some moves to at least shore up some of this capital to protect yourself in the case we do have layoffs and people are out of jobs or skyrocketing prices? And I think that's a very big concern, especially if freight is, declining. And you're seeing, I'm glad you brought up the cardboard box thing, because I was reading a report on cardboard boxes last week, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is really troubling. Cardboard box demand plunging at rates that we haven't seen since the Great Recession. So
Right.
that is a true measure of our economy right now. If people are buying things, if people are not shipping things, then jobs will be the inevitable fallout from this. Companies are going to cut the fat and they're going to lay people off.
Yeah, people think that I believe that, Wall Street has this crystal ball or those guys have these supercomputers and you look at cardboard boxes and you say, hey, look, how does that work? Well, it works pretty good, actually. Um, so yes, those are the things that you're talking about that usually come after. If you're not selling cars, there's going to be some people laid off, that are selling cars. We're already seeing people being laid off because of AI. People are just becoming much more efficient. Do I need as much from my secretary when I have AI, or do I need the answering service after hours when I can have AI answer it? So you've got a lot of different things converging at the same time. People have less money to spend. Things are becoming a little bit more expensive. The earnings are starting to be pulled back by these companies that are looking at it and saying, "Hey, the consumer just can't keep spending at this pace. You can't keep spending if your credit card's maxed out. You can only go so far." So I believe that Gunlatch is probably right, where right around the second quarter of 2024, you're going to start to see the recession, but you're going to see the effects like you're talking about right after Christmas, when you usually see that January effect of, okay, things are on sale right after Christmas. Let me hold off a little bit. A lot of people have been doing that and then purchasing in January. I don't think you're going to see that this year, and that will start to send some alarm bells ringing and people start to lay off people, readjust their earnings again for the first quarter and second quarter of 2024. Yeah, JP Morgan, right at the end of October came out and Jamie Dimon said, look, the wars in Ukraine, the wars in the Middle East have far reaching impacts on energy, food markets, global trade, so on and so forth. True. We are spending so much money on this war when the money needs to be spent here in the United States on a lot of different things, in my opinion. But uh, you're going to see higher food prices for longer. You're going to see interest rates higher for longer. If you're investing today, like you were as the interest rates were going from the high in the 80s down to, really on a real basis negative, but let's call it a 0.5%, 1%, and you expect that your mortgage is going back to 3%, you can forget that. You have to start investing today and thinking today that I'm going to spend more money on food, I'm going to spend more money on energy, and I need to change the way that I'm investing from a low interest rate environment to at least an environment of 5% to 7% mortgages, somewhere in that range, because that actually is the long-term average. So we just regressed back to where we normally are, but everybody's in shock because of it. So you're getting the commercial real estate, and the WeWorks just went bankrupt, so it's probably going to cause a little bit more problems with the commercial real estate. People have to change the way they're thinking about their investing at this particular point with interest rates, because it's the biggest driver of returns in almost every segment of investing.
That's a great point. I was just speaking with a number of builders, a number of home builders, and had a deep discussion with them. And I was asking them how are interest rates been affecting, of course, the building process. They're still building, but of course now you're getting a lot of sort of baby boomers they're sitting on cash. They're able to come in and make purchases. Millennials, of course, are sitting back hoping that these interest rates are going to come back to a 3%. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. 2%, 2.5%. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. We're back to the 1990s when we had a housing boom and a rockin' economy, and interest rates were in the 7 range in the 1990s. So people forget that. And that was sort of a normal price range during a housing boom in the 1990s.
Yeah, if you look at interest rates on the long-term basis, you will see basically a 40-year up and a 40-year down cycle. So if you go all the way back to, the 50s, the roaring 50s, interest rates were fairly low. They pushed them down, so stocks are going to be high. The interest rates kind of work their way up, and you had the boom in the 80s, and interest rates went up to 15%. Well, you tack on another 40 years or so, and the interest rate's not exact 40 years, but that's about the cycle, and you're going to hit a bottom, and then they're going to start going the other way. So that's why I say you have to start looking at the history. If you want to, look at the history of interest rates and say, okay, what are the investments that are going to benefit from a slightly higher interest rate type of environment, and change your methods of, or your at least your options that you're taking a look at for investing based on those interest rates. Everything, bonds, real estate, precious metals, everything is a present value of cash flows, or where that asset value is, all based on interest rates, and people have to adjust to that.
Yeah, you're out there in sunny Los Angeles, where I'm curious what the housing market looks like right now. And that are houses sitting, in the medium range, kind of on the market for a long time, and how does that look? I mean, are you seeing a lot of movement there, and is there a lot of struggle in that market?
Uh, Residential real estate's definitely pulled back. I would say 15 to 20%. The commercial real estate is extremely ugly, and it seems to be getting a little bit more ugly. So residential is kind of holding up a little, much better in my opinion than the commercial side of the real estate. You brought up the builders. The builders not only have this interest rate problem, they have a supply problem with pricing. I'm talking to these people. As you know, we have a lending company, Wilshire Finance Partners, and we lend to different builders and so on and so forth in the industry. These guys are just having problems with getting product that is at a reasonable price, right? I mean, a guy was on a lake and he just wanted to put another 4 feet of dock in, and it was $7,000 for the little floating dock pieces. He goes, that was $3,000 2 years ago. It's everything is just incredibly expensive for the builder. At the same time, interest rates are high, so it's just making it a lot more difficult to get to have builders build new projects, which we need, as you know, we need some more housing, and it's just harder and harder from a cost standpoint and an interest rate standpoint, which turns into a payment standpoint.
I want to talk about gold. Of course, this is your wheelhouse there at Lear Capital, and many of our viewers, I see them on a nightly basis talking about how they invest in gold, and a lot of them invest in silver as well. And so, but you're also seeing central banks. So central banks are also investing in gold, and they're buying up a lot of gold. We're seeing Russia, China, heck, the United States. A lot of countries right now are swallowing up gold because of what's coming. So there's a lot of like grabbing of commodities. There's a grabbing of silver. There's a grabbing of gold. There's a grabbing of oil. There's a grabbing of actual tangible things right now. Can you explain why we're seeing these central banks swallowing up a lot of gold right now?
Yeah, so there's two main reasons for these purchases. Number one, uh, if you print up $20 trillion like we have since 2008, the value of your dollar is going to become worth less and less and less over time, right? For every dollar out there, when you print another one, it's going to become worth less. The central banks understand this. They're experts at understanding it because they're the guys printing the money. So the last time they started purchasing this much gold was at the very end of the 60s and early into the 70s, right before inflation took off. That was the last time we saw the record amount of demand that we see from central banks today. Of course, you print up a bunch of money. Why don't we take this money and turn it into gold? Because that's going to go up. We'd rather have that on our balance sheet than a bunch of dollars or, treasuries that are going down in value as interest rates go up. So that's the big reason. The second reason is gold does very well when interest rates are high. If it didn't, then gold wouldn't have been $800 an ounce at the early 80s, at 1980, when inflation was high and interest rates were 15%. Well, gold started in 1974 at $50 an ounce and ran its way up to $850 an ounce. Two reasons. One, inflation. Two, big central bank buying through that whole period. So what are they doing again? Started last year with record amounts of buying, the largest we've seen in 50 years. So that would take us back to the late 60s, early 70s. And this year they've exceeded that again. So you're right. China has been purchasing like crazy. I just got a report yesterday. The demand from China is 14%, has said 14% ahead of the same period last year. Biggest buyer in the world right now. They added 23 metric tons last month alone. That's a lot of gold. That's 740,000 ounces of gold. Clayton, when a central bank purchases gold, they don't purchase, they're not day traders. They don't buy today and sell tomorrow. They buy today and they hold for 10, 15, 20 years at a time. If central banks are pulling that much gold out of the market, then you're going to have gold prices near the highs because you don't have enough gold to go around to the rest of the people. It's going to fluctuate. In my opinion, it'll fluctuate in the 1900s up to the 2000s, and it will have its breakout when there's just no physical gold to supply. So if we see this record demand end up in the last quarter of this year, first quarter of next year, you get a recession, that continues, then you get the individual investors coming in because they're trying to protect themselves. What happens to price when you have an increased demand on a fixed supply? It goes up. So that's why people are talking about $2,700 gold, $3,200 gold, possibly into 2024. So I believe gold's a great opportunity right now. Great hedge against higher interest rates, great hedge against inflation, and great hedge against the recession. We've already seen all of that happen with gold previously.
So $3,200 an ounce for gold. It's nearing $2,000 an ounce for gold. I know Bank of America has a $3,000 price target for gold. That's a huge jump, but $3,200 for an ounce of gold, and that's amazing.
The gold has a 92% predictability to where the our U.S. debt is. So if you took the U.S. debt throughout time, gold would be correlated to that debt amount by a probability of 92%. I would love to go to Las Vegas with 92% odds that I'm going to win, right? Because unless you believe the government's going to stop printing money, which is $1 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see. Matter of fact, it's $1.5 trillion to 1.7 trillion now that they're continually adding. Then you have a 92% probability that the precious metals are going to follow where that debt level is. Well, if you put the calculation on where the debt level exists today, then the gold price should already be $3,200 an ounce. So has this happened before? Sure. It should have been 2000 when it was 1100 back in 2010. Did it get there? Sure it did. It went right up to where it was supposed to be. So for every dollar that they add, does gold just tick up? Is it that predictable? No. So you look over a 3 to 5 year time period, the predictability is there with a fairly accurate track record. So the 3,200 is not just pulled out of the air here. We're looking at the debt around the world and in the United States and trying to calculate a number that's going to be, predictable for investors.